This is Scott Becker with the Becker's Healthcare Podcast. I'm thrilled today to be joined by one of the brightest people I get a chance to visit with periodically. We're with Regine Villain. Regine is the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Ochsner Health System. Ochsner is a wonderful, wonderful health system, sort of the regional leader throughout the entire Gulf South region today. Regine, can you take a moment, tell us about yourself, tell us about Ochsner, and then we'll talk about the trends you're following, how competition and strategy is evolving in the supply chain world, and more. Regine?
Well, good afternoon, Scott. Thank you so much for this wonderful intro. And I just want to tell you guys that there's a lot going on, but it is my pleasure to be able to spend this time to talk to Scott. I appreciate what you're doing and raising the awareness about supply chain everywhere that you can. My name is Regine Villain, and I am the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Ochsner. I've been here a little under 2.5 years. It's really hard to believe that it's not even been 2.5 years because so much has happened in my time here. But frankly, I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. Ochsner is, as you said, is a leading health system in the Gulf South, and we're primarily in the state of Louisiana and in some other neighboring states as well. We are growing at Ochsner, and our goal is to continue to grow and to affect as many lives as we can in the Gulf South in order to help with the health outcomes of those in the Gulf South region.
And take a moment, you're in such an interesting area in the supply chain world. What are a few of the trends that you're following in supply chain? What are some of the things you're thinking about and trends you're following in your world?
Well, following last year, one of the things that I know that I'm focusing on and our operation is focusing on is restabilizing the base. We've had quite a few happen in the past year, but really it's been very important for us to continue to not only maintain continuity, but also to find ways to strengthen and solidify the base. So what we're calling our table stakes, we want to make sure that we're continuing to do that very well, and we're doing everything we can to create intentional connections with our stakeholders throughout the entire health system. So it's almost like we're going back to the basics to make sure that we're really stabilizing the base. For me, that's one of the first things. The next thing, of course, we all have been talking about finding ways to bring distribution, to bring manufacturing a little bit closer to home. And it is one of those things that Ochsner has taken to heart. I'm sure you have seen that we have actually entered into self-manufacturing as an entity. And I got to tell you, there's a lot going on in that space as well. But I know that my colleagues in the supply chain world share the need and the desire to make sure that we're bringing manufacturing as close as we can to home. And so we're playing a part in that. The other piece that I think we're also looking at is how we're strengthening our data, because we have found out very quickly that data is king. And we've always known that data was king, but during the entire pandemic and the ebbs and flows of the various peaks and valleys of the pandemic, we found very quickly in order for us to be able to exact the changes and to be able to address some of the needs, we needed to have really good and solid information in the form of data that we could mine very quickly, that was credible, and that we could also act on. So this is an area that we are looking at. We're looking at a data strengthening strategy, basically, and looking at ways to also bring more digitization into the supply chain world. Say that 3 times really quickly. Another area that has also revealed itself, as you know, most of the workforce has been working remotely for the past year and a half, really, and we're no different at Auctioneer, where we have a conglomeration of folks who are still working remotely. We have, some folks who are working in a hybrid capacity, some days in the office, some days working remotely. But what's definitely come up is we need to make sure that as we have the workforce now in various states of either working from home or hybrid, how do we maintain the engagement? How do we make sure that our folks remain connected to the purpose? How do we make sure that we're also helping them grow professionally and personally? One thing that I really appreciate about what we're doing at Auctioneer is that we're taking the time to pause and really look at the impact on the whole person. How are we doing? How are our team members doing? And how is it that we're able to have good, strong mental health in order to be able to also manage the business that is required of us as supply chain folks? And so in all, you could say talent management, but I think it's a little bit more than just talent management. I will stop here because there are probably a couple other things, but I think that those particularly have been areas that I've been focusing on. I just thought of another one that I think is notable. It's the idea of making sure that we also have a multi-sourcing channel strategy as well. Because the thing in the past about JIT being where everybody wanted to go is really no longer a viable option. And so it's really important for us to make sure that we have a multi-pronged approach.
Well, let's talk about two of the things you've mentioned, at least to start with. One is the sole sourcing versus multi-source and the fight against just-in-time or hitting this right balance. I mean, so many things had moved to sole source because you can get something cheaper, more economical, bigger deal with the supplier, so sole source. But talk about sort of the movement away from sole source and also talk about self-manufacturing. Just in the last several days, Civica RX, which is the pharmaceutical generics put together by a bunch of not-for-profit health systems, is working on, moving towards some self-manufacturing. You're moving towards some self-manufacturing. Talk about that and sort of the pushback against what originally was sole source. People were getting such great deals with sole source, but people are tentative about sole source today.
Well, I mean, sole source, the idea of sole source is great because, as you're saying, it is one where you can afford to have economies of scale and really get almost like the best bang for the buck. The idea that you have the majority of your market share with an entity, whatever the entity is definitely very attractive. It's attractive on paper. Now, practically speaking, and certainly it has worked for us. Let me just say this, it's worked for us for a long time. And to the extent that we can continue to do that, but manage the risk, it is still okay. However, what we're finding and what we've found out since last year is a lot of the manufacturers, a lot of those vendor partners are themselves having a hard time keeping up with their own supply chain and being able to supply us with what we're looking for. The market has exploded, demand has gone through the roof, and we have not gotten to a place yet where we have stabilized that. The demand continues to grow, especially in the past couple of weeks now, where we're seeing a surge nationally and internationally with this Delta variant that everybody's talking about. And we happen to be in a region that is also very susceptible to that increase. And we're seeing the increases every day, and we've been monitoring those very closely. I'm saying that to say that even if one wanted to continue with the idea of sole sourcing, in many instances, it's just not possible anymore because our manufacturing partners and vendor partners are really not able to compete and to keep up. And so it's almost like forced us to be in a situation where we have to diversify our approach. We need to understand, what is complementary to some of the things that we've used before. Some of the therapies that we've used before, can we use something else to supplement, or can we use something else completely? And of course, there are implications along the continuum as to what that means, but we are having these conversations. We are including our clinical partners, our ancillary partners, in order to be able to understand what options could be available. And then we go out and find those that we're looking for. So we start with our constituents, and then we push the envelope now with others to try to figure out how we can get our hands on what we're looking for, whether or not it is something that is here near shore, or whether or not it's something that's somewhere else. But we are at least having conversations about how we can diversify the options available to us and how we can diversify our channels in order to ensure the best possible option for us to be able to have what we're looking for. So that's one of the things I think about sole sourcing. If one can do it, absolutely. And if it works for you, it works for your entity, I'd say yes. However, what we've learned is that the time of leaving all your eggs in one basket is really not very prudent. Because what happens is you got, vultures that are coming in and swooping those eggs, and before you know it, you look at your basket and all the eggs are either gone or cracked. And that's not what we want, because we are in the business of taking care of people. It is important for us to make sure that everybody who comes into our hospital doors, gets a great episode of care. And so we take that very seriously. And for that, we're looking at every possibility that we can to diversify our sourcing. So let me stop here before I go to the next one, self-manufacturing. Did I answer your question?
No, yes, you hit it very, very well. No, it's this right balance on sole sourcing versus not, and not being too vulnerable to a sole source option. And what you said was interesting is that many places can't even offer sole source because they're scared they want to know their own volume and supply themselves. Talk about self-manufacturing and where you're looking at that.
So self-manufacturing almost came very naturally to us when we were in the thick of the pandemic last year. At some point, again, very similar to what I just talked about, the idea that we were not able to rely on our own partners. And even though we did, I think, pretty well going into the pandemic and being in a position of fortification that afforded us the ability to actually get through, we also, canvassed every network that we could in order to get our hands on supply. But our regular partners were not able to support us in the way that they could, just because the sheer volume and activity was just way too much. We had some wonderful relationships that really helped us, but it became very apparent that at times when we really wanted to have access to certain items, certain equipment, we were at the mercy of others. We were at the mercy of other folks' supply chain or lack thereof. So it was very concerning. It was frustrating at times. So we just had a conversation and said, what about the idea that we could have access to what we want because we're either self-manufacturing it or it's right here in our backyard. And of course, I can't say that we are the only people who are talking about that, but we decided to do something about it at Auctioner, and we partnered with a known manufacturer, and we created the joint venture of Safe Source, and that is the entity that is managing the self-manufacturer. We're still at the infancy of Safe Source being able to even produce any of the items that we've agreed to produce for now. Right now, we're going to start with gloves at first, and we will also have some masks available. And there are a few items that we have also agreed that we're going to do. But the idea is that over the course of time, we will fortify ourselves and we will become more and more vertically integrated as a supply chain and as an organization as well. So we're very excited about that. I know I am, and every day we're learning something different. Because I can tell you, at times it's a little bit confusing trying to figure out, wait a minute, who am I today? Am I the manufacturer? Am I the supply chain leader at Auctioner? Am I the customer? Because we have to play all those roles in putting together this endeavor. And so we're starting to have some really rich dialogue and some actually action items. And we're expecting that sometime by the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, we may be able to have our first gloves come out the line. So very exciting.
Magnificent. It leaves you a little bit less vulnerable to the supply chain too, if you could do some of it yourselves. Talk for a moment about, we've talked about sole source manufacturing, we've talked about self-manufacturing. Talk about what you're most excited about this year. When you look at the things in front of you, what are you most excited about?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I have to go back to the self-manufacturing because I'm very, very excited about that and what it means not only for Auctioner, but what it means for the industry. Because this is supposed to be an endeavor where Auctioner is going to be the beneficiary. However, the idea is also that we're going to open that up to others as well. Part of our joint venture also includes Vizient, and so we are looking forward to utilizing the Vizient machine as well to help support, our ability to put these gloves and these items of PPE in the market. I'm really, really, really excited about that because this is something new. This is not something that has necessarily been done before by any hospital systems, at least that I know of. And so doing that, there's an element of excitement that I just have to continue to harp on because this is something that's really, 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 really exciting. The other thing that I'm excited about this year is that we've also we're still in the throes of our integration with Lafayette General Hospital, which is in Lafayette and now known as Auctioner Lafayette General. And so we have a lot going on with this transition. And so I am looking forward to everything that we're going to do together as a combined entity and really looking forward to continue to elevate the excellence that we want to bring as a supply chain. So I'm excited about the new relationships that we are making. I'm excited about learning about some of what Lafayette does and excited about what we can learn from them and how we can together elevate the supply chain organization or elevate really health outcomes through supply chain. And so that's something that I'm very passionate about. The other portion of what we're doing that I'm excited about as well is looking at those areas that are somewhat unconventional that you don't necessarily hear the supply chain talk about. We want to look at the impact of the supply chain in the non-acute areas. We want to look at the impact of supply chain in the digital world, in other areas that normally you don't think about, community impact, because Auctioner has anchored itself in the communities. We take the business of taking care of people really seriously. And so we've made investments and we've made a pledge to support our communities, not just by talking about it, but also by doing a lot. We've invested $100 million in what we're calling the 40 by 30 initiative, which in essence is, a pledge and action, a call to action for us to help bring the state of Louisiana from its current number 49 when it comes to health outcomes to number 40 by the year 2030. It may not sound like, it's lofty enough, but certainly there's a lot involved in being able to get there. And the supply chain is standing shoulder to shoulder with the operation to make sure that we are playing a key role in that as well. And for that, it means that we're going to have to get involved in areas that we don't normally get involved in. Like I mentioned before, the impact on the community engagement, the impact on what we're calling the social determinant of health, the impact on the quality outcomes, more intentionally than we've ever done before. The impact on, like I said, the non-acute world and all other areas that we also want to push the envelope. So there's no shortage of really exciting things that I'm looking forward to, and my team is as well. And we're just locked and loaded, ready to go.
Regine, magnificent. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to visit with us on the Becker's Healthcare Podcast. It is a great pleasure, and it's inspiring to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time today with us.
Well, I appreciate you, Scott, wanting to talk to me and wanting to make sure that you're having the voice of the supply chain community. I truly, really appreciate what you do, and I always look forward to the podcast, except mine, because I don't like to listen to my own voice.
I love hearing your voice. So thank you so much for taking the time with us today. Regine, we'll talk to you again shortly. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott.